The electrified rail line between Boston and Washington, D.C., otherwise known as the Northeast Corridor, is the busiest rail line in North America, and it's also one of the only electrified ones. While it's an essential piece of infrastructure that needs reliable equipment, since it's electrified, it calls for specialized locomotives. Today, we'll be talking about the backbone of this corridor, the Siemens ACS-64 electric locomotive. Chapter 1. History. Our story begins in the late 2000s when Amtrak was in search of a replacement for their aging electric locomotives in the Northeast. Operating as early as 1978, Amtrak's 54 infamously reliable EMD AEM7 locomotives were beginning to show their age, while their 15 newer HHP8 locomotives were suffering from consistent breakdowns and mechanical issues. This led Amtrak to search for a worthy replacement of these engines in the late 2000s, and as they'd done in the past, they turned to Europe, a continent with far more experience building electrified trains than the United States. In 2010, Amtrak began to talk with German manufacturer Siemens Mobility, which had a lot of experience building locomotives worldwide, but was a relative newcomer to the American rail industry. Modifying the European Vectron and Eurosprinter platforms for the US market, Siemens proposed a so-called City Sprinter locomotive to Amtrak, adapting high-tech European rail technology to America's antiquated infrastructure. In October of the same year, a deal was reached between Siemens and Amtrak, culminating in a $466 million order for 70 electric locomotives, which were to be classified as ACS-64s. These locomotives would have a top speed of 135 miles per hour, be capable of operating on Amtrak's various different electrical systems, feature all modern safety systems such as Access and PTC, and be more efficient than older locomotives, putting energy back into the grid with regenerative braking technology. Overall, they were designed to be a modern reincarnation of the AEM7, combining reliability with state-of-the-art technology. The first locomotive was unveiled on May 13, 2013, and subsequently sent off to the Association of American Railroads Pueblo Proving Grounds for safety testing. After being approved for service in North America, sprinters began to be delivered to Amtrak shops in Delaware, where they were prepped for service and tested. After testing with Amtrak for just under a year, on February 7, 2014, ACS-64 number 600 led Northeast Regional Train 171 between Boston and Washington, D.C., marking the beginning of a new era on the Northeast Corridor. Chapter 2. Present Day. Over the next 2 years, Siemens would continuously build these locomotives until June of 2016, when the final ACS-64 number 670 was delivered. By that August, all 70 sprinters were in service, allowing for the full retirement of all older equipment. Since 2016, the ACS-64s have been the backbone of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, being used as motive power on the following routes: the Northeast Regional between Boston and Washington, the Keystone between New York and Harrisburg, the Pennsylvanian between New York and Philadelphia, the Vermonter between New Haven and Washington, and the Cardinal, Carolinian, Crescent, Palmetto, Silver Star, and Silver Meteor between New York and Washington. A total of 78 trains use ACS-64s every day, and still mechanical failures are relatively uncommon despite these locomotives being almost a decade old. Anyways, let's get to know these locomotives better. As I mentioned earlier, these electrics are classified as ACS-64s, but what does that mean? Well, the ACS stands for Amtrak City Sprinter, but contrary to what many may think, the 64 doesn't represent the locomotive's horsepower output, rather its electrical output. At full throttle, the ACS-64 can produce a whopping 6.4 megawatts or 8,600 horsepower, but continuously, this output is decreased to 5 megawatts or 6,700 horsepower. Either way, a lot of power even for a high-speed locomotive. With all this power, the ACS-64 can hit a top speed of 135 miles per hour, although in regular service they're only permitted to do 125. What else is there to say? Well, Amtrak owns 70 ACS-64s numbered 600 through 670, skipping number 666 because apparently Amtrak is a bit superstitious. All 70 units are equipped with raised letter Nathan K5LA air horns, Graham White e-bells, and are easily identifiable at a distance by their LED headlights and ditch lights. Most units wear Amtrak Phase 5 paint, although there are a few special units roaming the corridor. Let's take a look at those. ACS-64 number 600 is painted in Amtrak's Phase 5 paint scheme, but on its two cab ends, it pays tribute to former Amtrak president David L. Gunn, who led Amtrak between 2002 and 2005. ACS 64, number 606, currently wears a temporary ad wrap for National Geographic's Beyond King Tut exhibit, although a few years prior, in 2019 and 2020, it wore a temporary ad wrap for Coca-Cola. ACS 64, number 642, is painted in Amtrak's red veterans paint scheme, promoting their employment opportunities for veterans. Finally, ACS 64, number 662, currently wears a temporary ad wrap for Train Sim World 2, although in addition to being a free add-on in Train Sim World, it also wears a Phase 3 Amtrak paint scheme for the railroad's 50th anniversary. Of course, of these 4 special units, only 2 are expected to last more than a few months, but I'm sure in the future we may see more ad-wrapped ACS 64s. Anyways, speaking of differently painted ACS 64s, let's talk about the Sprinter's other operator, SEPTA. Since 2017, Philadelphia-based commuter rail SEPTA has taken delivery of 15 ACS 64s, operating them on select rush-hour express trains. All units are essentially identical to those of Amtrak, with the exception that they're obviously painted in SEPTA paint. Chapter 3. Future. Anyways, what does the future hold for the Sprinters? Well, in the immediate future, they'll most likely continue to operate as they have since 2014, but unlike the AEM-7s, which saw almost 40 years of service, the ACS 64s will be retired relatively early. Thanks to Amtrak's recent $7.3 billion equipment order, most ACS 64s will be replaced by dual-mode Siemens charger locomotives before 2030, leaving only a handful laying around. While many will be sold off to other railroads, a few will be retained for long-distance Amtrak routes that run under the wires between New York and Washington. These select few engines may receive a midlife overhaul with refreshed electronics, a new coat of Phase 7 Amtrak paint, and other upgrades, but again, the majority of Amtrak Sprinters will likely be sold off to other railroads in need of electric equipment. While it's certainly possible that any railroad may buy these engines, I personally think that there are only 4 real contenders, those being the following. The Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority could purchase Amtrak's retiring Sprinters to begin electrified service on their Providence line, which despite operating in electrified territory, currently uses exclusively diesel locomotives. The aforementioned SEPTA could purchase Amtrak's ACS 64s to expand their existing fleet of Sprinters. Maryland's MARC could use Amtrak's ACS 64s to replace their infamously unreliable HHP8 electrics, and finally, GO Transit could acquire a few Amtrak ACS 64s for use on their new electrified lines opening in 2026. Additionally, future high-speed rail projects such as California High-Speed Rail, Texas Central, and Brightline West could possibly use a few Sprinters to test new electric infrastructure. Of course, Amtrak will likely be retiring 40 and 50 ACS 64s, so any combination of these railroads could end up purchasing them, and as of right now, everything is just speculation. Whatever happens, the ACS 64s will likely continue to prove reliable, regardless of which railroad owns them. Chapter 4. Conclusion. Unlike the HHP8s, which were originally intended to replace the AEM-7s on Amtrak, the Siemens City Sprinters truly were their modern successor, combining reliability with modern technology. Not only did they move Amtrak's Northeast Corridor into a modern era, but for almost 10 years now they've been a dependable backbone of their busiest routes. While the ACS 64s may not be used on Amtrak for as long as the AEM-7s, for now they continue to prove an important part of Amtrak's future, especially since the Northeast Corridor is their busiest and most profitable line.